The audio's here. It's kind of loud. Okay, sorry about that. Phew. Sorry. Okay. Feel free to intro yourself. But I won't watch because we got to get going. So, but I will leave this up. This is how things are going to work today. So I have my flight at like 4. Well, board's at 4, so I'm going to be leaving at 3. So it's not like a full day workshop like I often do. That's actually a great thing because normally at around 2 o'clock people stop being able to keep going. So it works out okay. And we will take breaks on occasion, and we'll take a break for lunch for like an hour or so. And as far as the actual exercises go, if you have the project all set up, that's great. If you don't, then you can go to github.com. I'm going to paste a link here. Tree workshop, this one. So I'm going to paste a link in there. Follow the setup instructions in here. This is indeed a branch off of the master. Yeah, so you just follow those setup instructions and it should get you all set up. If you look in this project, you will see we've got a whole bunch of files here, and then we have this test directory and a ton of files in here. Any file that has a .finished is the finished version of an exercise, and so you can peek at that if you want to, but try struggling with it first. They are not ordered, and that's intentional. I will adjust the order as we go and ask you what you want to learn most. I do have a pretty specific order when we get started, but then we can start talking about specific things that you want to learn. Yeah, the way that it works is, for example, our first one is this JustDom one, and you'll see we have a friendly little koala bear right there. His name is Cody. Hi, Cody. And Cody will be your guide through all of these exercises for you to be able to follow along. So the way that I do workshops is I don't teach anything until after you've already struggled with what we're supposed to be doing. So pretend that you're sitting down and you say, I have a task, and my task is, oh, actually, sorry, this isn't our first one. Spoiler alert, React DOM. That's the one. So you say, I have a task, I need to test this favorite number component. You can go look at what it is and what it does and things. And Cody the koala bear will help you know what you're supposed to do to successfully test that component. Occasionally you'll see this 100 symbol, Harry the 100. I don't remember what I call him. Harold? I don't know. But that is like giving you tips and ideas and things. And occasionally also you'll see the book emoji, and that's for docs and things like that. So yeah, that's how things work. And then when you are finished with the exercises and your tests are passing and everything, then you can go down to this test down here, remove that .skip, and then fill out the elaboration and feedback. So this elaboration and feedback thing is pretty much a mechanism for you to reiterate what it is that you learned in the exercise and instruction. So I would prefer that you wait to actually do this until after I go through the solution, and then if I forget, please remind me, because this is a part of your learning experience, is to say, okay, now that I've consumed all this information, let me take a step back. What did I learn? And you write it out, and you'll remember it better. That's science and stuff. So that's what that's all about. We'll have one of those at the bottom of each exercise. Except for the test-driven development one that I just finished this morning. I forgot to do that. I just realized. I'll fix that later. Yeah. Any questions about how things are going to work for the workshop? I'll show you how to run the tests and things next. Okay, let me just check Twitch here. Yes, this will land on YouTube. So people can check it out later. Okay, So, assuming you have the project all set up, you ran the setup stuff that that I show in the README, then you should have all the stuff in here. You should have the node modules thing, and to start the test, like we've got some scripts in the package.json. We have this test and a test:watch. So to get the test started, you just run npm run test:watch, and that'll start tests in watch mode. Hi Amy, welcome, welcome. So yeah, npm run test:watch to run this jest-watch script. That will start you out in watch mode. How many of you have used Jest before? Okay, most of you. How many are familiar with Jest watch mode? Okay, so I'll give you a quick rundown of Jest watch mode. By the way, if you are using PayPal scripts here at PayPal, it comes with Jest baked in. The test script will run in watch mode locally. So all of the things that you're learning here will be really relevant. And PayPal scripts also comes with a bunch of really handy plugins and things, which I probably should have put in the workshop for fun, but I didn't. So you can run all, like pretty much just read the watch usage thing, and it will tell you everything that you can do and play around with it. The thing that we'll be doing most is to press P to filter by a file name regex pattern. So if we hit the P key, our first exercise is going to be in a file called JustDom. Here. There we go. So JustDom. You don't want to do the finished one. So you can say react-dom.js, and that will get just the React-DOM one. That'll run your test, and it should be passing. All the tests will actually be passing from the start, and you just have to add additional stuff. But yeah, that'll run just the one test, and then we can go in side of React-DOM and follow Cody the Koala Bear's instruction to get that all going. Cool. So before we actually, I leave you off to this, does anyone have questions or I probably should have asked this earlier, but is there anything in particular that people really want to get out of this workshop, that you're have significant questions you really want to make sure that we cover in the course of the workshop?
Are you going to cover any setup for Jest? Something?
No, I'm not going to. So the course that I'm working on has a big thing about setting up for Jest, and I think I was here at PayPal I think in February, or maybe it was last year, that I did another testing workshop, and I did a big thing on setup. Front-end Masters also, I have a big thing on setup. But yeah, when I was at PayPal before, I think I recorded that as well. So let me see if I can find that really quick. Let's see, PayPal. Yeah, testing JavaScript applications workshop. I might have covered, in that 5 hours, I might have covered test setup. But lucky for you, if you can migrate your app to use PayPal scripts, you don't need to worry about setup, because there's all just install the PayPal scripts and then you don't need to worry about it. So yeah, there's just not enough time. I mean, if everybody really wants to do setup, here's the thing with configuration workshops, is they're just insanely boring to have exercises for, because it's like literally take these lines of text and put them in here, because there's in coding it's fun and it's exciting to try new and different things and whatever, but in configuration you can't do different things. It doesn't really work. You have to use that configuration property. So if you want me to, I can walk through my setup stuff and I can just go through that, but you'll just be watching for like an hour. So I'm happy to do that if you want. Any other questions or things that you really want to make sure we cover? Yeah.
So are we using the test library for this?
We will, yeah. We'll work our way to React testing library. But to get started, we'll be using just plain React stuff. Yeah, and then that's I'm glad you mentioned that. There's a pretty common misconception is the difference between a testing library and a testing framework. So, and a testing runner. So Jest is a testing runner and a testing framework. So Jest is responsible for this test global variable we have here, and it's also responsible for running our tests. That's what Jest does. It also does mocking, and we'll get into mocking and stuff. It has a whole bunch of features that are part of the library and a bunch of features that are part of the framework, a bunch of features that are part of the framework, and then a bunch of features that are part of the runner. So that's Jest. And then testing library is something that helps facilitate testing for a specific use case, in particular React. And so we're going to be using React testing library, but we're going to work our way toward React testing library. We're going to start out with regular React DOM. Good question. Other questions or things that you want to make sure we cover in the course of the workshop? Okay, let me just double check the chat now that people have had a chance to catch up and stuff. Testing with event outside of a component. Oh yeah, that would be a good one. I don't have anything for that. But you can check the downshift test to see how we do that in downshift. Cool, okay. So, yeah, if you're in Jest watch mode right now, you should have, you hit the P key, type react-dom.js, and it should be running this test. Cody the Koala Bear wants you to test our favorite number component. We're going to be getting used to this favorite number component, or we're going to be using it quite a bit, so you should get used to it. Basically, it is a component that renders a div with a label and input, and you can type in any number that you want to, but some of your favorite number may not be a valid favorite number. I'm sorry. It has to be somewhere between the number 1 through 9. And if it's not, then we're going to display a message indicating the number is invalid. So we're going to be writing a bunch of tests to validate this, to validate the behavior of this component. Our first test is really just going to verify that this label is rendered and this input is rendered, and that the label has the right text and the input has the right type. So that's for our basic first test. That's all that we're going to be doing. And we're going to be doing that using React DOM. Yeah, so normally you use React DOM just to render the top level app, right? In testing, all you care about is this little component. So you use React DOM just to render this little component. And that's what Cody the Koala Bear is going to help you do. Any questions before I set you off on this? Okay, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll go for a couple minutes, but I'm going to go ahead and add or start up some music, because Free Code Camp has a cool radio station that plays coding music all day, which is kind of fun. So. If this really bothers you, let me know and I can stop it. But. My guess is that something wrong with installing. No, I'm using it. You can use it. Yeah, my guess is something went wrong in the install process. Did you run the setup script or install?
I think run setup.
What version of NPM do you use? Oh, is this? Oh. So you can try to upgrade your version of NPM and then reinstall NPM. Because there's a version 6 now. So just remove the Oh.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, so I should like bump this up too. This is here. Let me. Whoa. Either way, yeah, it's easier to see. I could do a higher contrast font theme, or theme, but is that okay for everybody to see? Okay, so if you're wondering what file I'm in, I have the breadcrumbs enabled, so source, test, react on. So you can always look at the top here to see what file I'm in at any given time. And even what method I'm in. What? That's kind of cool. Okay, anybody finished already? No? Okay. We have plenty of time. We are here for you. Take all the time you want. It's running direct test now, but that's just by virtue Sorry, what? Oh, either way. It doesn't. It's mostly your identifier, so I know. Oh, this person was tied up here, and maybe that's why they were tied up here. Or something. I do occasionally send an email and say, "Oh, you had a question about this, or you had this feedback. Could you elaborate?" So the email is useful, but you don't have to put your email if you don't want to. All right. Anybody finished? Not yet. Yeah. Okay. Just wait just a second longer. let's go ahead and work through this solution. Sorry?
No, so we are using just to render it, just API to render it.
No, don't use just API to render it. So this is,
React DOM.
yeah, you can, yeah, we'll use React DOM. So,
Okay.
yeah, actually the exercises aren't necessarily designed for you, or you're not necessarily supposed to be able to complete them all or like finish the entire thing. It's mostly to get you coding before I start talking about it so that you have more context to understand what I'm talking about. So don't feel bad if you don't finish or if things are a little bit confusing. If things are really confusing, then let me know so I can improve it for next time, but or I can answer your question. But yeah, so we're going to need to test this favorite number component. Again, just that the label is rendered with favorite number and that the input has the type number. That's all that we are going to try and assert right now. Make sure it never breaks. So to be able to render an element to the page in React, you have to have a DOM node. And if we look at document.body or document element.outer HTML. So this is our entire document. This is what it looks like. Our whole page just looks like HTML head, body, HTML. So we could append this to the body, I guess, to just like render it straight to the body. I think React will give you a warning. Maybe they stop doing that. That'd be something to look at. But in any case, what we're going to do instead, is I'm going to make a div with document.create element div, and then we're going to render to that. So to render, I'm going to need to import React DOM from React DOM, and then I can say React DOM.render. The thing I want to render is this favorite number component, and I want to render that favorite number component as a React element. I need to create a React element, so I'm using JSX, and if I want to do that, I need to import React from React, and then I'm going to pass the div as the second argument. So the subject of my rendering, where that rendering is going. And then if I console log document element, dot outer HTML, we can see, oh, that's weird. Should be there now. Oh, haha, no, it's not there. The reason is because this div is just living somewhere in memory. So we won't see it there. We can see if I use the div instead. The div does exist. It's somewhere in memory, but it's not part of the body. That's actually kind of important. We'll get into that later. Cool. So we have this is our container div. You could also call this container. That's normally what I do. But yeah, so that's our container div, and then this is the div that we're rendering in our favorite number. And then we have our label and our input. Cool, so now what we need to do is, we've got those things done, we've got this done, and that done, and that done. We need to assert that the input has an attribute that is a number. So how do we get the input? Well, it's just DOM nodes, so we can use query selectors and stuff like that. So we're going to get my input node with container dot, we could do get by tag name. I'm just going to say query selector input. And we'll also get our label, and we'll put that above. Label node is our container, query selector, label. And then we can make assertions. So we'll expect that the, sorry, and I should have referenced you to the assertion documentation. I'll show you that here in a little bit. But yeah, so we'll expect the label node dot text content to the favorite number. Cool, save that. Our test is still passing. And then we'll expect input node dot type to be number. Cool, test is still passing. Let's make sure that it can fail. So if I go in here and change this to text, that will fail my test. Good, that's what I'm looking for. I want it when I break my stuff, my test will break, so it'll let me know that I broke something. Cool. And that is the whole first exercise. What questions do you have about this? Was it pretty straightforward or not straightforward at all? So confusing that you don't even have questions?
No, I actually use the wrapper or a shadow wrapper.
Yeah, so you're used to using enzyme, right? Yeah. Yeah, we won't be using enzyme at all today. We'll be using something that I think is better. And I think you'll love it. All right, sweet. So go ahead and take this opportunity to fill out the elaboration and feedback form, and just kind of reiterate what it is that you learned in this exercise, and then we'll move on to the next one. And I'm going to check on any questions in the chat really quick. Okay, so somebody asked a question, Master Rambo, thank you, saying, do you recommend using or doing tests for every single component you create? That's a great question. No, I don't recommend testing every single component that you create, because many components have, in applications there are generally lots of things that you could spend your time doing. And if you don't care about users, then yeah, you can spend all of your time testing and never ship anything. So that would be fun. But no, it's actually I would recommend like kind of finding a good balance of there are different areas in your application that require different levels of rigor for testing. Like our checkout button. Probably a good idea to make sure that never breaks. That's like, I don't know, millions of dollars a minute or something. I don't know how much that is, but that's a lot of money that could be lost for every minute that is broken. So we never want that to break. But maybe some things on the settings page or something, that like it wouldn't be great to have that break, but it's not nearly as bad. So code coverage metrics and reporting are useful, but they don't tell you like you have this % of the really important stuff covered in your app. Like a extra line covered in a useless component counts just as much toward coverage as an extra line in the most important component of your app. So kind of take it's an art, not a science, yeah, generally that's why I say no, don't test every single component, because not every single one really matters all that much. So cool. Any other questions before we move on to the next?
The render methods as well, right? If we have a helper render method.
Yeah. Well, I try to avoid thinking about implementation details of my components. I'm more concerned, and the way that I think about testing is like, is it the render method or is it something that's happening in component did mount? Like, to me, that doesn't matter. I don't really care. All I care about is what the user is going to care about. So this thing is rendered to the page. When I click on it, this new thing is rendered to the page. Those are the kinds of things that I care about. As far as whether that's in the render method or component did mount or some other vanilla JS library, that's all implementation detail. Okay, sweet. So the next one that we're going to be testing, if you type or hit the letter P in your watch mode, we're going to be, actually I've got this order.md file in here to keep me on track. We got just-dom. And actually I'll do just-dom.js, so we just run the exercise one. So you go find that, just-dom. If you want to, you can cheat and look at the finished version, but that's no fun. Okay, so this should look similar to what I just finished and maybe what you just did, with a couple extra Cody the Koala Bear comments. So I'm going to leave you to these. The idea here is we have these assertions here that aren't like super helpful with error messages and things, and so there is a library called JustDom that extends expect in a way that lets you have some extra assertions. So I'll just give you like a minute or two for this one. It should be pretty quick. And much to the Twitch viewers' chagrin, I'm going to turn on the music. Feel free to mute. Sorry, no, you'll open up JustDom.js and it'll have the instructions of what to do, and then you just follow those instructions, and then have your tests run the JustDom tests. Everybody finished already? Okay, cool. If you didn't finish, that's fine. It's mostly you just need to get your hands moving and get things going. So let me turn this down. Okay. Okay. Cool. So what we're going to do here, code of the koala bear is telling us to import JustDom extend expect. So that's what I'm going to do. What that is doing is actually, here, I'm going to leave that commented out first, and I'll show you what that's actually doing. Actually, here, I can just go to that file. Rats. JustDom extend expect. There we go. Okay, all that's doing is it's requiring this dist extend expect, which is requiring this index file, getting all those things, and calling expect.extend with these extensions. These extensions are like a whole bunch of things here: to be in the DOM, to be in the document, to be empty, to contain HTML, like to have style, focus, disabled, all that stuff. Okay, so you, by virtue of importing this file, you're extending just expect assertion library with a whole bunch of additional assertions, two of which to have attribute and to have text content. So with that, I can remove this .type and I can make this assertion directly on the DOM node, which means that if there's a problem, then Jest is able to give me a much more helpful error message. Instead of saying you expected text to be number, it can say you expected this input to have a type of number, instead it has a type text. So here we'll say to have attribute and text, or sorry, type of number. Okay? And then for this one, we expect this label to have text content favorite number. Cool, and that should all work. And if you go in and break something about your component, then you should get an error message. Let me expand that a little bit. Expect an element to have attribute type of number, receive type of text. That's more helpful than number is not text. Well, yes, of course I know that number is not text. Everybody knows that. But here we can see that's actually like the assertion that's failing. That's the thing that we're trying to do. So JustDom is awesome. It started originally as part of my React testing library, and then Ernesto, I can't remember how to say his last name. He's a great person. Here, let me find it. I feel bad. Ernesto Garcia, of course. He extracted it and made it its own thing and added a whole bunch of matchers, and it's awesome now. So I highly, highly recommend that if you're using React testing library and testing React stuff, to use JustDom because it's great. Okay, any questions about that? Chugging along? Everybody okay? Okay, sweet. So go ahead and go through, reiterate what you've learned, like take a step back, what did I learn, write it out, and then we'll come back. I'm going to look at questions on Twitch really quick, if there's anything. All right, cool. So let me fix stuff so my tests are passing. The next one we're going to do is DOM testing library. DOM testing library. So open up that file. Remember, you can just watch my breadcrumbs, see what file I'm in at any given time. So we've got the same stuff, but now we're going to make things a little bit better. So here's why, and let me start the watch mode with DOM testing library.js. So basically just take the name of the file that you're in, hit the P key, type that file in, and it'll run those tests. So there is a limitation with the way that we're testing this right now, and that is, what if I added a label, remember me, with an input, type equals check, box, right, and then I add some stuff in there. Okay, now my test is breaking, right? Why is my test breaking? Because my test was implicitly relying on the implementation detail of the order of what is being rendered. Okay, so just with by nature of query selector, it finds the first element to match that query and returns it. And so I added this remember me checkbox, and now it's all broken. Okay, so that's no fun. You'll hear me talk about this a lot, and I think it's very important to ingrain this into your brain. When you're testing, just take a little step back and say, okay, if I were a manual tester, tasked with testing this manually, and somebody gave me a list of instructions of how to test this, they said, okay, so find an input and verify that its type is number and that its label is favorite number. And so every single day you go through this, and oh yeah, it's still number, like it's still number input. I can like use the up and down arrow keys that goes up and down, and the label is still favorite number. That's great. So then somebody makes a change to the application. They add a label, remember me, with a checkbox. Does that break your test? No, you're like, oh, useful feature, and then you can go like double make sure that everything's working. That's because we're humans and we can do that. So our test should simulate the same kind of experience that a user would have in manually testing this. And so that's where DOM testing library comes into play, because it has these queries, these utilities, so that are better than query selector for finding elements on the page that are of significance. So instead of, like if you were to go tell a manual tester to test your component, say, hey, we've got an input with the favorite number label, you're not going to tell them, find the first input and verify that the first input is this, that would break their test, right? Oh, the first input isn't this anymore. No, you'll just tell them find an input that's the type number and its label is favorite number. Okay, so that's what DOM testing library allows for us to do. And yeah, so from there, I'm just going to set you off on that. Here's our book here. So if you want to go check out docs and stuff, you can look there. But hopefully, Cody the Koala Bear can help guide you through this. So if you want to, go ahead and add that label remember me checkbox thing and see, and your test should fail, and see if you can make it pass by switching over to DOM testing library. Okay, we'll have a couple minutes for this one. Sometimes I walk around, it's not just being creepy, it's people generally have an easier time getting around. That's not to say that you can't just throw something Alright, everybody finished? Not yet? Okay.
also use the get element also.
Yes, that's right. Well, that's not true. You can actually use the method directly if you want to.
For element actually.
You can do it either way.
I directly try to
Uh-huh. Yeah, you can use that. You just need to import it.
oh,
Yeah, it's not fun. So you need to import it from DOM testing library. All right, let's go ahead and go through this solution. So, any questions before I actually work through this? Okay, cool. So there are a couple ways to do this. If you read the docs, the way that I solve it is with get queries for element, but you can actually import a specific query from DOM testing library and use it directly. You did that, I think. So either one works. What I'm going to do is I'm going to import get queries for element from DOM testing library. And then I'm going to have my queries equal get queries for element div. And then I can use, instead of this, I can say queries dot get by label text favorite number. And I can and that should give me back the label or the form control that's associated with that label. So because of this query, I'm actually making this assertion. Does that make sense? So I know that there is a label that has a text content favorite number because I'm going to get a form control, an input that has that is labeled favorite number. Okay, so that's great. I can get rid of that assertion. Cool. So with that, my tests are passing. Hooray! And even though I have this thing, it is working fine. Okay. So there are a couple of advantages to this approach. Let me get rid of this stuff. So first of all, it's less code. That's kind of nice. But more importantly is my application. I'm now not only testing the favorite number input, but I'm also testing accessibility of that label and input. So with the old way of testing, I could actually break this, maybe have a typo or something. Now that form control is not accessible at all. So there's no label associated to that form control. But it's hard for me to know that. And with the way that I was testing before, I wouldn't have caught this bug. But with DOM testing library, I can catch that because it says I found a label with the text of favorite number, but there's no form control associated to that label. And that's because the HTML4 attribute is not pointing to this input because there's a typo. And it also gives you a really nice log of the container, which is pretty cool. So you can see, oh, looks like my label has got a typo. Let me go fix that, and now my test is passing. So that's one benefit. The other benefit, of course, like I said, is now your test doesn't care about the structure of your component. It does care about the text of your component, which has interesting implications for localization. But I am of the strong opinion that your test should have your default locale loaded. So all of your components should be rendered with the default locale. If you don't want to do that, then there's a data test test ID. We can say favorite number label or something, whatever you want to call that. And then you can query by the data test ID. There's a special query called get by test ID. So if you want to do it that way, that's fine. But I strongly recommend using the localization, because if I think it makes more sense to do it that way. If you're a little bit worried about, like, oh, what if somebody changes this to from favorite number to favorite numbers, or very favorite number, now my test is all broken. That's why generally when I'm using these text match queries, I'm going to use a regex, because the user doesn't care what the case is, and so I'll use a regex, make it ignore case, and it doesn't have to match the whole thing. It just has to have a label that says favorite number somewhere in the label, and that works fine. So that's what I normally do, is use a regex. This text match can also be a function that accepts the content of an element and then the element itself, so you can verify that it's not only a link, or it does not only has the text of create PayPal me slug, but also is a link, like an anchor tag, which I literally did last week. So there's a fair amount of flexibility with your text match argument there. Any questions about that?
Yeah, get back to that localization. Like,
Mm-hmm.
usually when we do use like IDT and call that function to do the localization. That is
Yeah. So in
more
in PayPal scripts, that the testing setup actually will load up all localization for you in the app before it starts running. So you don't have to mock out anything, it gets loaded. And so all of your tests and everything have the default language rendered in the components. You don't have to think about it. In P2P Node Web, I actually had a pull request to support this, and it got shut down. So you can go talk to them about that. But yeah, if you for some reason don't want to do that, I think in P2P Node Web right now we instead render like curly braces and then the key or something like that. So you could actually select on that if you wanted to. Just say get by label text, the key of the I18N thing, and that would work. And some people might like that better, because then you're not at the whims of the changes of the localization team. But normally, at least here at PayPal, we're the ones who are changing the English version of the locales anyway, so I'm fine with that.
So you mean in PayPal scripts, you just in here get by label test, you just put the English.
Yep.
Locale. Wow.
It's pretty cool, right? Yeah. Let's get you motivated to migrate to PayPal scripts. It's pretty awesome. Yeah, cool. Any other questions? I know it's not trivial, and you're doing a lot of good work, Dong. I'm sorry that it's so hard. Okay, cool. Let me just double check questions in here. So somebody asked me a question. Now I'm trying to remember that that was a good one. Oh yeah, it was test structure. So let me take a quick break to talk about where to put your tests. Actually, I'm not going to take that long of a break. I'm going to show you a blog post. What code comments can teach us about scaling a code base? So the premise of this blog post, this was a while ago that I posted this. I'll put this in Twitch. But the premise is, when you write code comments for some code, do you put that comment in a big comments directory that's mapped mirroring the file structure of your code base? No, you're going to put the code comment right next to the code that it's commenting, right? That's the only sane way to do this. And I feel the same way about pretty much everything in software. so if there are things that change together, they belong together. And you want to get things as close to each other as possible. This is why I love JSX with React. This is why I love CSS and JS with anything. It's because I can take all of the concerns, I can take all the elements of a single concern and put it in a single file or a single area. Testing is unique because you generally don't want to put your tests in the same file. I actually have done that before. It was kind of cool, but I don't recommend it. And so we're going to put that next to that file. Let's put it as a separate file. So in here, it's kind of contrived because this is a workshop thing, but I'll have like my files here, and then a __ test _ that has a file of the same name to test that component. That way, when you move things around, they get moved together. When you make changes, you see, oh, there's a test for this. I'm going to update those tests. Or there's not a test for this. I'll add those tests. And so, yeah, however else you structure your application, put your unit tests at least right next to where they belong. Integration tests would generally test several things. Maybe you put that next to a screen or something. You're testing that screen. End-to-end tests will go at the root level of the repository because that's what it's testing. That's the concern. It's the whole app, right? So yeah, so that was a good question. Let me just double check we're not missing other questions. So yeah, I won't be covering how to do localization, like set up localization for your app, because it varies widely. And here at PayPal, if you just use PayPal scripts, you don't need to worry about it. And if you can't move to PayPal scripts, you can see what we're doing in PayPal scripts. If you're using PP Content Loader, it actually has I'm the maintainer of that package. It has a module that you can call that will cache the content, all the default language content, and then you can load that from the cache in your Jest setup stuff. So you can go see how that works in PayPal scripts. But for everybody else here on the internet, you're all doing things wildly different. If you're using a modern solution that has the default, my current favorite is called JS Lingui, and you can actually write the default content in your source code, just like as if you're not localizing anything, and then it will extract things, and then you build like 30 bundles for one for each language. But in that scenario, you don't actually need to worry about localization at all because the content's there. It's pretty cool. So let's see. Why do I not recommend putting tests in the same file? It mixes concerns like how do you do imports properly? Like, am I going to be importing test utilities and things? It makes the file kind of a mess. That's mostly why. You wouldn't, and if you end up doing that, you would the way that I did it was I said if process.env.nodeNV equals test, then boom, here's all my tests inside that if statement. It was kind of interesting. And then dead code elimination would just get rid of all of it at build time. It was kind of cool, but yeah, wouldn't recommend it. Can you tell what you don't like about Enzyme? I've got like a bunch of blog posts and things about that. Just like search around me on the internet. I've got a talk actually. Confident React Byte Conf. This is probably the best source for that. What I don't like about Enzyme. There you go. Okay, cool. Sweet. So any other questions before we move on to the next?
So in general, it's a good idea to have data test ID for all the elements we have. We run into the problems of finding multiple nodes and then locating. So test ID is.
So are you talking about like for end-to-end tests with the big page and stuff, or?
In general, even at the component level test, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the selector would be the data test ID would be the better approach. Or,
so if you're comparing, okay, actually I've got a DOM testing library. In the DOM testing library, there's a section in the FAQ about which method should I use. So here's the order of the methods that you should be using. If applicable, use the top one first. So if applicable, use get by label text. If that's not applicable, get by placeholder text. If that's not applicable, then get by text. So that would be like getting a button to click or something. If that's not applicable, get by alt text for getting an image. And then if that's not applicable, there's actually a new one that we need to add here. That's get by role. So if it's a dialogue or a modal or something. And then get by test ID. That's the very last. One thing that's intentionally not listed is query by or query selector, which you can still do with like in here we've got our div. We can still do query selector, but there's the reason that is not mentioned, and you should generally not do that, is because what you would normally be querying is implementation detail that the user doesn't care about. Even get by test ID is implementation detail. The reason that this is better than other queries is because if I'm looking in the source code for this component, I can see very clearly that data test ID, whatever that thing is. So if I'm looking at here and I'm moving things around and stuff, I know without even looking at the test that this is important for tests. Whereas most of the time we'll do class name, and then you start having all of your tests rely on this class name. It's like button blue or whatever, and then somebody says, oh, I don't want it to be blue anymore, I want it to be green, and now your tests are broken. Why would you do that? Data test ID is superior to other selectors for that reason. But it's my least favorite selector because it not only does it is it kind of an implementation detail. The user doesn't care what data attributes your elements have, but it also makes an impact on your source code, and your test shouldn't change the way your source code is written. At least not in that way. They should be like improving the way you write your source code, but that should kind of happen naturally. Does that answer your question? So follow this, and you'll be really good.
So let's say there are already tests using some other API, be it enzymes or whatever, right? So we don't have these kind of things. So what is the generic approach?
Switch to React Testing Library. You can use them simultaneously. You can migrate slowly. You can take a wrapper, get the host nodes.instance, and now you have your DOM node, and then you can use these queries with those, and you can migrate over time. But I can't recommend. If you want me to tell you that Enzyme is great, I'm not going to.
No. What I'm trying to is I'm just looking at general approach.
Yeah. So if you're using Enzyme and you're querying based off of component name or class names or whatever, my recommendation is to move away from those things because they're slowing down your team. Because tests break when the component is working, and tests don't break when the component's broken. And that's like the worst situation you could be in. Okay. Sweet. Let me go ahead and fill out the elaboration and feedback form here at the end, if you haven't already. And let me just check on Twitch questions and things really quick. Would you all like to have a break, like just a 5-10 minute break to walk around and get a drink and stuff? Okay, let's do that. We're going to do a 10 or 5-minute break or so. Things going okay?
Yeah.
Good. Mm-hmm.
Of those orders. So our hope is that we can pull that forward as much as possible. But we're sitting there at
How are things going so far, Katie? How are things going so far? Good. You what?
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, my laptop is still the old one. The one that won't fall off the counter if my kids trip on the wire. Alright, I'm going to start up again here in a second, even if they don't show up. We got. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. They will learn to leave too long. No, just kidding. Okay, so I got a couple questions on Twitch that I thought would be interesting, and you asked me a question. Actually, I'll answer yours first. So the question is, so if you start putting a data test ID all over the place, what happens to users, right? Like we're sending a whole bunch of stuff to users that they don't care about, so should we like take that out or something? There is a that is actually a common question. So it's in the FAQ. If you really, well, so my recommendation is use those for end-to-end tests, right? Yeah. That's great. We like it. We already, all over PayPal, everybody's got Nemo Test ID, or I don't know, what is it called? Nemo Test ID? In PayPal Me, we don't use Nemo Test ID, we use Data Test ID. So we can use it for Nemo, and we can use it for React Testing Library. Incidentally, we can also use it for Cypress Testing Library, which is what I recommend people use for end-to-end testing, and the build is failing. What? I think that's a pull request that's failing. Anyway, so yeah, I recommend leave it in. I think it's really useful. You can even have smoke tests that run even against production. I think it's great. But if you really just can't stomach the fact that you're sending stuff to the user that they don't need, then there is a Babel plugin that you can use that will remove those properties for you. So you just use it in production, and you can strip those out. No big deal. This is one of the reasons I love Babel, is because it enables us to do things that are good for us and for the users, which is great. So that was one question. Another question here. Do you have any advice on where to start testing in the middle of a project? Yes. So think about, and this same advice applies testing at any point in time. You have like a ton of tests, or you have no tests. So the best place to start, well, actually that's not entirely true. So if you have no tests at all, choose something really, really easy to test, because the hardest part of getting testing going in a project is the configuration and getting the tooling working. So choose something that's very easy to test. Once you have the testing framework all set up and everything, then where to go from there is think about the most important critical part of your business. Like, what's the most important screen on your web app? Go there and make sure everything on there is well tested. And then find another screen that's really important. Make sure everything on there is well tested. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to unit test everything on there. It could mean that you just render that entire screen and interact with the elements on there, and you can get really good test coverage. And then and mostly I would recommend thinking about the happy path for those. And then you can go in and say, well, this component's pretty complicated. It's got a bunch of edge cases. So let's go ahead and we'll test each, we'll render just that component, then we can test those edge cases. But yeah, you can get a lot of coverage just by like rendering a full screen and testing that whole thing. So good question there. Any follow-up questions about that? Okay. So this is a good question. What if I have more than one element with the same label or text, like a mount input field in one div and an amount and a total in another area? So this is actually pretty convenient because here we have this get queries for element. So you go find through some other mechanism, maybe you get by test ID or something, find the area of the page that has the amount 1, find the area of the page that has the amount 2, and you get a set of queries for each side of the page, and you can get it that way. So that's one way. Another is each one of these queries has an associated query by and a query all by and a get all by, so you could get all of the elements that match these. Generally, I'd kind of shy away from that unless you're actually getting a list of things that and the order is irrelevant or something. Yeah, so that's another approach. But yeah, generally I would say get queries for element. Another interesting fact about this is there's also a within thing that you can use, and it's actually just alias to get queries for element. They're the same thing. So if you think that name is too long, then you can say within. But I thought it was more descriptive for this example, so that's why I did get queries for element. But yeah, so it's a pretty common scenario. Another thing that you can do is in this text match right here can also be a function that returns true or false, and it gets the contents, the text contents, and the element, and then it'll just iterate through every single element on the page, and you say whether or not it's the element you're looking for. So, in this case, it'll iterate through every input on the page. So actually, get by label text is a bad example. Get by text is a better example. So it'll get you the text contents and the element that it's getting, and then you can tell whether or not that's the element you're looking for based off of some other criteria. Data test ID is another way to do that, to differentiate those. Okay. Any exploration done using those for tests for E2E? I would recommend Cypress Testing Library and use Cypress. It's great. It's fantastic. I love it. And Cypress Testing Library brings all the wonderful queries that we learned from React Testing Library and DOM Testing Library to Cypress, making your tests even better. Would you also take a moment to share your thoughts on whether end-to-end tests like Selenium are relevant as an extra line of coverage as of today? I do not like Selenium. I think it's very, very hard to test applications with Selenium. It is.
It's for functional tests.
Yeah, for functional tests, end-to-end. I use the terms interchangeably. I honestly don't know what the difference is. So the alternative tool is this Cypress thing that I keep talking about. If you're not familiar with Cypress, then get familiar because
what's the difference between DOM testing library and the Cypress testing library?
So Cypress Testing Library runs in an actual browser. What we're doing is running it in a simulated DOM environment. And so, yeah, there are various trade-offs. So Jest is like millions of times faster than Cypress. Cypress is getting fast and great, but yeah, it's way faster to test with Jest. The tooling around it is way better. Like the watch mode is so good and things. So generally, I focus most of my efforts around tests in Jest land, and then I'll do a couple with Cypress, mostly happy path end-to-end sort of things. Then I'll cover edge cases with and the rest of things with Jest. So that's what I recommend. Cypress. Here, actually, I should post a link to those things. I should note that Cypress doesn't currently support anything but Chrome right now. It can run in electrons and stuff, but like who cares about that? So yeah, it's just Chrome. They have a pull request for Firefox support, and Internet Explorer may never come. I don't care about that. Actually, like
PayPal has issues with Chrome.
what does?
PayPal has issues.
Yeah, PayPal has issues with Chrome right now. That's true. Hopefully those go away soon. Yeah, so I'm way less concerned about cross-browser testing than I was like 5 or 4 years ago. I was barely getting into software 4 years ago, so I probably didn't care about it that much back then either. But yeah, like years ago, cross-browser testing was a much bigger deal than it is today. Now, like depending on where you work here at PayPal, like most of our users are using modern browsers. We do have some that are using old ones. And so, like, having maybe 1 or 2 Selenium tests that run cross-browser just to make sure that the app can actually run at all will get you all the confidence that you need. And then you can write like 500 tests using Cypress, which is like 500 times more than you'd probably write if you were doing Selenium because it's so hard. So another question about using Puppeteer for end-to-end tests. If we're comparing Puppeteer versus Selenium, then I'd say Puppeteer every day, all day, never stop. It's great. But we're comparing Puppeteer against Cypress, and that's, to me, it's almost laughable because Cypress is so good. So yeah, just use Cypress. It's way better. So another person's asking me about Test Cafe. I haven't used Test Cafe, but I have a really hard time believing that it could be have a better developer experience than Cypress. So I can't really tell you much about Test Cafe. Okay, and then questions about things that I can't answer right now. Cool. Let's go ahead and move on to our next thing. So we're gonna do.
Test running in Cypress.
Well, you can go watch it, cypress.io, and they've got this little demo that yeah, it's pretty cool. They have a UI here. There's your app. Your tests are running. At any point in time, you can click on one of those steps, and it'll open up the console, which will break a Selenium test, by the way. But you can actually interact with the DOM. At any point in time, you can pause it and say, okay, stop right here. And yeah, it's so good.
That is also very much like functional tests.
Oh yeah, you can stop writing Nemo tests and use Cypress instead. Yeah, so think of Cypress as a Nemo replacement. Okay, cool. So if we're looking at our order. There we go. Now we're in React Testing Library.js. So DOM testing library is cool, but there's a little bit of boilerplate and stuff. Let's make this easier with a library specific for React. So if you hit the P key, type React Testing Library.js, that should run just these tests, and then you can follow Cody the Koala Bear, who will help you take your DOM testing library test and make it a little bit more straightforward with React Testing Library. Any questions before I set you off? Yeah, React Testing Library.js. Okay, cool. I'll leave you to this for a few minutes. The music stopped. What? There we go. All right, anybody finish? Okay, let's go. Here, go back. Oh, you hit the T key instead of the P key. Yeah, so here actually let's clear all filters with the C key. And then I'll just all right, let's go ahead and solve this, and then I'll go on a big exploratory experience with React Testing Library and some cool things. You got it? All right, cool. Sweet. So instead of using React DOM and get queries for element, these are things that we're going to do for every single React component that we test, right? So that's like a fair amount of boilerplate. There are some other utilities that might be useful in a React context. So React Testing Library exists as kind of some pretty light, like a thin layer of abstraction on top of DOM Testing Library to make things a little easier for us.
So we don't have to use, we can directly use React Testing.
Yeah, you generally don't have to use DOM Testing Library. Yeah, DOM Testing Library exposes a bunch of utilities that React Testing Library actually forwards on. So later we'll see a fire event utility, a wait utility, a wait for event. All of those come from DOM Testing Library, but you can import them through React Testing Library. It just forwards those utilities on. Yeah, the only export that React Testing Library gives is the render method. Everything else is coming from DOM Testing Library. So we'll get rid of those imports.
Question.
Yeah.
So, again, sir, I had the habit of using enzymes before.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, it's fine.
But there we don't use render unless we are testing the actions. So we can use shallow because you don't want to render it to the DOM.
Yeah.
Do
So
we have similar things?
shallow rendering is a terrible thing.
There are flavors, right? So, yeah.
So there is a blog post I wrote a while back, why I never use shallow rendering, and I think it's a terrible idea to shallow render components for testing.
Really test.
Yeah, because it doesn't test anything.
Yeah.
Exactly, and your test will break when your component's actually still working, and your component will break, but your test can't tell you because it's not testing the right stuff. So, great. I'm glad we agree on that. Yeah, so the render method from React Testing Library is synonymous to the mount method from Enzyme.
Yeah.
And then there's the render method in Enzyme is like React DOM server.render to static markup. And so it just renders to a string, which the user also cannot do. They're interacting with items on a page. That's all they care about. They don't care about a string of HTML. And so, yeah, with React Testing Library, all you can do is mount. You can only use the render method to mount. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and we'll import render from React Testing Library. And then we don't need to create our div. We don't need to use react-dom.render, and we also don't need to get queries for element. But let's take care of each one of these one at a time. Instead of React-DOM render, we're going to use the render method we get from React Testing Library. And instead of providing a div, it's going to create one for us. And then instead of calling get queries for elements for that div, we can just put that there instead. And that's it. Nice and simple, clean, beautiful. And there are a whole bunch of methods that we can get from here. And not just methods, but here's the container. If you want to get that DOM node that it created, then you can get the container. If you want to create your own DOM node, then you can provide that as an option here. You can provide the container. You can also provide the base element, which is not normally a common use case that you need to worry about. But this will also return the base element. The base element defaults to document.body. So what that means is that this isn't exactly like what we had before. What we had before was DOM testing library. We said, get me all the queries for this div, my container that I made. What React Testing Library does is it actually gives you queries for document.body. So it looks like when you say get by label text, it's going to look through the entire body for all elements that match that.
It's actually pain in the neck to iterate through that DOM thing and figure out what you need.
Yeah.
I slowly started liking this now.
Good. Yeah, so part of the reason for that is because users aren't interacting with elements in memory. They're interacting with things that are on the document.body. And sometimes things behave differently. In case in point, React behaves differently. So all of its events don't actually work unless the element is in the body and the events are set to bubble up. And so React, that's the biggest reason that push React Testing Library to actually render your stuff to document.body. The problem is that once your test is all done, if we look at document.outer or document element.outer HTML, then we can see that our document.body still has this element in it. So we got to clean it up somehow so that the next test doesn't have that element in it. So if I added another test stuff and I put this in here, then I'm going to see like my HTML, my document body is messed up. So this is kind of the importance of testing, having your tests work in isolation. If we didn't, like if I were to actually just duplicate this same test, this second one, well, it still succeeds, but it's actually, this input is the one that this one rendered. Okay, so I'm working with the wrong input. If I set the input.value equals high, or I guess it's a number, so I'd say 6, and then I console log input.value in this test, I'm going to get 6. But I didn't change the input that I'm rendering here. I changed the input I'm rendering here. So there's no test isolation here. That's a problem. It can lead to very confusing bugs where you skip one test and now all of the other ones are failing. And you're like, wait, what happened? So, or you delete a test or something. So to combat that, there are a couple things you can do. I'll show you the thing that you'll be like, wait, that's stupid. And then I'll show you something you can do that's not stupid. So we can do unmount. And we can make this thing unmount. And now we get the correct value. But we actually still, even once we've unmounted, if we document element, whoops, outer HTML, then we're going to see that we actually have that extra div hanging out there, which is not super cool. It'd be cool to get rid of that. So we could say, okay, take that container, container.parent.remove child container, and then now we've cleaned up properly after ourselves. Okay, so nobody wants to do that after every single test, right? So React Testing Library exposes a method called cleanup. And then you can just call that right here. And that'll clean up everything too. But that's also kind of dumb to have to do that, or it's not cool to have to do that after every single method or every single test at the end of every test. So we can use after each. Yeah. And then we can call cleanup in there. And we can even make that look all nice because it's a function that takes a function. So we just say after each cleanup. But I don't like doing that either. So what I do is I import React testing library, cleanup after each. And then I can get rid of that. And then I don't need to do that. So it's even easier, right? But I don't like doing that either. So in every single file, I don't want to put these two things in there. Like that would be super annoying. And so I'm not going to show it in here, but Just has a setup framework script file configuration property, and you just put that in there, and then you're good. It's my fault, but in the next major version of Jest, that property will be called something different. And so go look up at the docs what it's going to be called in the next major version of Jest. I hope that's released soon so I can update my course. But anyway, normally your test should look something like this, and you won't have to worry about anything. You just you'll have all these assertions, and your React testing library setup stuff will be fine. But in all of our test files, we just have it like this, so you don't forget those are important things. And that's how you're getting all of this stuff to work. One other really awesome thing about React Testing Library is the debug method. So I've been console logging document element outer HTML. It's kind of annoying. Debug, you can just put anywhere and it'll add a console log that'll log out the body at any point in time. So here, well, we set the value to 6. Here, if we do that, I think that'll fix it. No, I don't know. Oh, it's got a value. Yeah, because I have a value. It's a controlled input. That's why. Actually, if I remove that, then that should. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. But anyway, so it can be useful to put debug at the beginning, and then you do some action, and then debug again, and you see what the difference is. So yeah, then you can see, oh, like this label changed. That like, why did it change? Something's busted. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
So you get 2 debugs, and then you can see the difference. If the document body is too much for you, like you're testing a whole screen, and that's a lot of HTML and stuff, actually built into React Testing Library, if it's a certain number of characters that are just like a silly amount of characters, it will clip it at the end. And you can override that behavior. But yeah, normally if it's that much, then it was probably an accident. That's why we clip it. But if there's something in particular that you're interested in debugging, then you can pass a node to debug. So here we can pass input, and it'll only log out the input. Okay, but it's highlighted, it's like syntax highlighted, and it's formatted nicely and everything. So it's kind of cool. You could also, if you just care about your container, then you can pull it in the container, and you won't get the whole document body. You'll just get the container. So kind of cool. Definitely use debug. Do not leave debugs hanging around though, because they're like super annoying in tests. When you're running all the tests, you got millions of logs and things. Very, very noisy, so don't have logs hanging out. That shouldn't be. Okay, cool. Any questions?
So it's easy to plug in this library and then you can start writing methods. As simple as that.
Yep, simple as that. Like we didn't have to change any configuration for this to work. If you wanted, yeah, you don't need any adapters or any of that stuff. If you want to make this easier so you don't have to import this everywhere, then yeah, you can put that in a setup or something. But yeah, you don't have to configure anything.
And we can use all the methods that DOM testing library.
Yep, you can use all the same things. So like DOM testing library has fire event and wait for elements and a whole bunch of others. It's pretty cool.
Simulation, yeah, we need to cover simulation.
So we don't simulate events because users don't simulate events; they fire real ones, and so we fire real ones too. But yeah, we'll cover that for sure. I think that's our next one actually. Let me see. Order. Yes, that is our next one. I should probably call that events. Okay, so before we move on, go ahead and type out all the things that you learned. Hopefully it was many things. And I'm going to check out the Twitch chat and see where if I've fallen behind on anything.
By the way, that value thing, I think it's someone tweeted about it.
About what?
What is it? That value? I think
Oh.
it's like some silly dumb API. To set value, it sets the default value. Like the value is a property or something like that.
Okay, yeah, we actually, and React does weird things too with the value, and so React Testing Library has a built-in mechanism for changing the value to make it so it works nicely with React, and that's actually what we're going to go to next.
So that's not the native.
No, it is. I think that is a native issue. Yeah, like you said. Yeah. Okay. Hey Gary, sorry you missed a whole big thing on React Testing Library. It's okay. You can watch the recording later. Yay! Okay, cool. So let's move on to our next one. That is called state.js. So our favorite number component does have state. It has the number, and then whether or not that number's been entered, so it can determine whether the number is valid. So and it responds to the chain. Actually, you know what I'm going to do just really quick? Git reset hard. Feel free to do that if you want to. I just had like a bunch of things all messed up with the things. I wanted to make sure I was still up with you. So then I'll npm run test :watch, get back into things. Then I'm going to hit the p key state.js. Oh, that's too bad. Let's do p key /state.js. There we go. Okay, cool. So here we want to actually test the functionality of our component. That's normally what you're going to be doing. And so sure, we can get the favorite or the input with the favorite label number, but I want to be able to change that input's value, have it call my handle change so that it comes in here, checks the validity, and I can verify that the error message shows up when the user enters an invalid value. Okay, so that's if we take a step back and think, okay, I'm writing instructions down to give to a manual tester. What are the instructions that I write? And I say, find the input that's labeled favorite number, type in the number 10, and make sure that oh, whoops, spoiler alert. Well, I already talked about data test ID, but you would add this later. But that's there for you. Just make sure that the message, the number is invalid, shows up. Okay. So in your solution, you can just verify that the container has the text content, the number is invalid. That might be actually how I do it myself. But for this simple component, but more practically speaking, in bigger components and things, generally data test IDs are a better way to zero in on something. So you can do either way. It's fine with this one. It's an art, not a science. I like saying that because I like to be a scientist and an artist. Okay, So the state file should give you instructions on what to do. We're going to be using this fire event thing. You can look at the docs to figure out how that thing works. There's a specific way to fire change events because React does change events in a weird way, and it tracks input values in a weird way. And so React Testing Library, well, actually DOM Testing Library built this capability in because it's useful outside of React. Yeah, check out how fire event.change works and make an assertion that verifies that the node with the test ID of error message has the text the number is invalid. Okay, sweet. And then I think we're going to go to lunch. All right, let's do this, and then we can eat lunch, and that'll be good. Okay, cool. So, yeah, I added a note for myself because I was worried I'd forget about it. But yeah, we talked about clean up after each, kind of cool. All right, so we're going to need a fire event utility. I think we might be getting kicked out soon. Oh no, I'll be quick. Okay, fire event utility from React Testing Library. That's actually coming from DOM Testing Library. It's just being forwarded on through, so we don't have to have more than one import. And then I'm going to pull in get by test ID, so we can get this thing when it's rendered. And now I'm going to use fire event on this input. So I'll say fire event.change. I want to pass the input, and then I can pass as the second argument to this, I can pass all the properties I want set on that event. So I can set bubbles and cap and what, I don't know what other properties you put on there. One of the properties that goes onto an event is the node that the event was fired on, the target. And so presumably you should be able to say input value equals 6 or whatever, and then you just fire event on that input, and your event dot target should have that value, right? That's what we're trying to do. React actually does this funny thing with DOM nodes in that it keeps track for every single or form control like this. When it creates it, before it puts it into the DOM, it adds a getter for the value. It overrides the default value setter getter. And so if you set something like this, then React will be like, oh, you programmatically set it, therefore I will not call your onChange event handler. That took me a while to figure out. But there's a way to get around that, but it takes like a several line function to do, and it's kind of confusing. So while you can set event properties on here, one of the properties on an event is a target. So I said, well, if you set at a target here, then any of the properties you put on here all attach to the target, right? And then if you set a value here, I'll attach it in a way that is not observable by React. Okay? So that's how this is all working. So now we can say the value, oops, is 10.
It need not be event object. So basically on change takes the event, right, and we don't have to. It also takes the event, and event or target will eventually have the value, right? So you
Yes.
have to send it as event, we're just sending it as an object.
Yeah, we're just sending it as an object. That's right. Yeah, so fire event will be responsible for creating an event object called change, and then we can say we want these properties attached to that event. And if it's a target, then it's not going to swap the target, it's just going to merge the things that we say in our target with the actual target. And it'll do so in a way that's not observable by React. So that's what's going on there. And then we're going to replace this with an assertion that verifies that our error message shows up. So let's go ahead and we'll debug right here. VS Code. Okay, debug. And we get this logged out. Sweet, we see our error message showing up right there. We're almost there. And we'll expect get by test ID error message. And there are a bunch of things that we could say here. I'm going to say to be in the document. So that's all I really care about, that it's in the document somewhere. And it is. Hooray! Woo! And that's our first stateful test. So a couple of things I want you to notice that are different from Enzyme. With Enzyme, all over the docs and in the issues and stuff, what they would say is go get your instance of this favorite number component and call the handle change method and then assert on the state. The user cares nothing about the fact that you're even using React at all, let alone that it's a stateful component that has a method on it called handle change. They don't care. And so neither should you. All the user cares about is what they see and what they can interact with. And so our test cares about the same things the user cares about. And so this is why we write it this way. We say, hey user, I want you to render this favorite number. I want you to find the input that is labeled favorite number. I want you to change that input's value to 10. And then I want you to verify that this error message is shown. This is kind of this is like a step back from that philosophy. That's kind of an escape hatch from that philosophy. We could also say expect container. So let's get our container to have text content, and then the number is invalid. And if you want to make this a little bit more resilient, then you can make this a regex that doesn't care about case, because the user probably doesn't care about whether it's cased well or not. And the user probably also doesn't care about if it says the number is invalid, just like number and invalid. And as long as it has those words, then it's probably good. So you can fudge things around a little bit, but the goal here is that what you end up with looks like instructions you give to a user. And a user will not say, give me the instance of this component and verify its state. So, okay, cool. It's lunchtime. I'm pretty sure they're going to kick us out. Yeah?
Does the effect of file event change probably to the subsequent tests? So let's say if you have one more test.
Oh.
Does the file event change?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. Why is the blog post not showing up? My tweet about the blog post shows up. So I'll paste this in here. But I'm guessing that you have some tests that look like this, where you render it here, and then you have multiple tests that use that. I am pretty strongly against this form of testing, and so you can go read that later, but we're getting kicked out. So yeah, it was fun. We'll be back in an hour at 1 o'clock in the original room. Okay. Unless this room is free, then we'll be in here. So, well, no, we'll just, I don't know. We'll find each other, and I'll tweet about this for those who are watching online. It'll be just an hour. So, see ya.
Here we didn't even mention I understand that